In this chapter, we're going to be discussing inheritance. And as I mentioned in the last exercise of the last chapter, inheritance is the ability of a class to inherit the instance variables and methods of another class, often called a superclass or the superclass. And the class that inherits the instance variables and methods is called a subclass. Let's start a Ruby program, and I'm going to explain this relationship just a little bit more before we start actually writing a program. We'll comment out some lines here and talk about inheritance. Inheritance is used to represent what are called is-a relationships. And by is-a, I mean things like this. Car is a vehicle. Bird is an animal. Paul McCartney is a musician. Those are the kinds of relationships that we model with inheritance. Because what we can do is we can create a vehicle class that defines most of the properties and behaviors of an object or of a class, and yet not be specialized. And then we can create a car object that's based on the vehicle object to specialize for a car. Just like a bird is a specialization of an animal, and Paul McCartney is a specialization of a musician. He's a particular musician, or in object-oriented terminology, we'd say he's an instance of a musician. So let's begin in this exercise to see how inheritance relationships are created with Ruby. We're going to start off by creating a rectangle class. And we want the rectangle class to inherit from our shape class that we defined previously. So to do that, we have to use a special indication, the less than sign, to say that rectangle inherits from shape. Now I also probably need to have the shape code here, so let's go get that real quick. And we're just going to copy and paste it into our program. We don't need the working program part, just the definition of shape. So let's get that. We'll put it up above our beginning definition of rectangle. To begin our definition of rectangle, the first thing we're going to do is create our initialization method, our constructor. And so a rectangle is going to be like a shape in that it has x, y coordinates, but we also define a rectangle by its width and its height. So those are going to be the other two instance variables that we're going to keep track of. Now, because we've already defined in the shape class an initialization method to get the x and y parameters from the constructor call to the instance of the object, we have a special way of doing that with inheritance, and that's called super. Super is like a method call that when executed will go find the initialization method, the constructor, for the super class and execute that code. So when I write super xy, I'm saying go find the constructor method for shape and execute that. So that's how we're going to assign x and y to our instance variables x and y. Then for width and height, we'll just do that like we did it with a single class. Now at this point, we're going to stop and execute an example just to make sure that everything works correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to say R1 is equal to rectangle new. We'll just define a point, 510, width of 7, height of 3. And then let's call the toString method. Remember that when we inherit from a superclass, we also inherit the methods of the superclass. So we should be able to call the toString method from shape to get the state of our rectangle object. Let's give that a shot to see what happens. Aha! A problem. It only displayed the x and y coordinates. That's because when we call toString for our rectangle object, it goes to the rectangle definition and looks for a definition for toString. It doesn't find it, so it moves up in the chain of inheritance to the definition of toString for shape, which it finds and displays. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add to the definition of toString and place it in the rectangle class. and we're going to do that in the next lesson.